The forest was silent that morning, too silent. Ranger Luke Harrison had patrolled these woods for over 30 years, but that day something felt wrong. No wind, no birds, just the cold whisper of winter pressing through the ancient pines. Then he saw it, a small pink shoe, half buried near the creek bed. His heart dropped. Following tracks only his experienced eyes could see, Luke found her, a little girl, shivering beside a fallen tree. "Don't let him find me," she whispered. The girl wasn't just lost. She was running from someone. With the storm knocking out all communications and night falling fast, Luke barricaded them inside his cabin. But who was the mysterious man in the red hat she feared? And why were there strange markings carved into the trees around where he found her? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first light of dawn painted Blackwood National Forest in hues of amber and gold. Luke Harrison stood on the porch of his ranger cabin, steam rising from his coffee mug as he surveyed the tree line. At 58, his face was weathered as the cliffs that bordered the eastern ridge, each line a testament to decades spent in these woods. "Storm's coming? Scout," he said to the German shepherd at his side. The dog's ears perked up, sensing the change in barometric pressure before any human could. Inside, Luke opened his worn leather journal, documenting the morning's observations. His handwriting, once precise, had grown slightly unsteady over the years, but the ritual remained unchanged. Temperature, wind direction, wildlife sightings. He'd maintained these records for 30 years, longer than his marriage had lasted. The radio crackled. "Blackwood North to Blackwood East. Come in, Luke. Reading you, Jim. Over. National Weather Service upgraded that system. Category 3 blizzard expected by nightfall. HQ wants all outposts to secure and shelter." Luke glanced at the barometer on the wall. It had been dropping steadily since midnight. "Copy that. I'll do a final sweep of the eastern trails first. Some hikers checked in yesterday, want to make sure they're out. Roger, be back before dark, old-timer." The radio fell silent. Luke turned to the small shelf beside his desk, fingers tracing the silver picture frame. Sarah smiled back at him, her face frozen in time 5 years ago. "Before the cancer, before the silence. What do you think, honey?" he whispered. "Something feel off to you too?" Outside, Scout whined at the door. Luke tucked the journal into his breast pocket beside his heart. Some rangers had switched to digital trackers and tablets, but Luke trusted paper and ink. Technology failed. The woods never did. He methodically prepared: heavy-duty flashlight, first aid kit, emergency rations, satellite phone. The familiar weight of his rifle settled across his back, not for people, but for the occasional mountain lion or bear. As he locked the cabin, Luke paused. The forest was different today. No birdsong, no distant chattering of squirrels. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Let's make it quick, boy," he told Scout. The eastern trail wound through dense pine and ancient oak. Luke's eyes continuously scanned, not just for hikers, but reading the forest's subtle language. A broken branch here. Displaced moss there. 3 miles in, Scout froze, hackles rising. "What is it, boy?" Luke knelt, following the dog's gaze. Nothing visible, but Luke felt it too. The weight of watching eyes. 20 years ago, he might have dismissed it as imagination. Now he knew better. The forest spoke if you knew how to listen. They pressed on. Near Boulder Creek, Scout suddenly darted forward, nose to ground. "Scout, heel!" But the dog was tracking something, zigzagging through underbrush until stopping abruptly at the creek bed. Luke followed, boots crunching on the frosted ground. That's when he saw it, half buried in mud, a small pink shoe. Luke's heart sank. He'd found lost items before, backpacks, cameras, even wedding rings, but a child's shoe this deep in the woods sparked primal concern. "Hello?" His voice echoed through the trees. "Anyone out here?" Only silence answered, heavy as the grey clouds gathering overhead. Scout whined, pacing in circles. Luke knelt, examining the ground. There, barely visible in the hardening mud, small footprints. A child, certainly, moving erratically through the underbrush. "Ranger Blackwood east to base," he called into his radio. Static answered. The storm was interfering with transmissions already. "Come on, Scout." They followed the tracks, Luke marking their path with orange surveyor's tape. The footprints grew more erratic, as if the child had been running, then stopping, changing direction. Running from something, the temperature was dropping rapidly. If there was a child out here when the storm hit. Luke pushed the thought away, focusing on the tracks. Scout suddenly stopped, ears forward, tail straight. A sound carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable. A child's whimper. Luke moved faster, pushing through a tangle of brambles toward the sound. The clouds had darkened the forest, shadows deepening by the minute. The first snowflakes began to fall. "Hello?" he called again. "Forest Service. I'm here to help." Another whimper, closer now. Luke rounded a massive fallen oak. There she was, a little girl, perhaps 7 or 8, huddled against the tree trunk. No coat, one shoe missing. Her eyes, wide with terror, locked onto him. Luke lowered himself slowly, keeping his voice gentle. "Hi there. I'm Luke. I'm a forest ranger." She didn't speak, arms wrapped tightly around her small frame. "Are you hurt?" He reached toward her. The girl flinched violently. "Don't let him find me," she whispered. "Who?" Luke asked, an uneasy feeling settling in his stomach. "Who are you afraid of?" Her eyes darted to the forest behind him, voice barely audible. "The man in the red hat." The girl trembled like an autumn leaf, eyes darting from shadow to shadow. Luke removed his outer jacket, draping it gently around her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame. "I'm going to help you," Luke said, keeping his voice steady. "But that storm's coming in fast. We need to get you somewhere warm." Scout circled them protectively, sensing the girl's fear. Luke noticed her bare foot, angry red from cold and scratched by underbrush. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, kneeling at eye level. She clutched the jacket tighter, lips pressed firmly together. Her gaze fixed on something over his shoulder, widening with terror. Luke turned, scanning the forest, but saw only the dance of snowflakes between darkening trees. "There's nobody there," he assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "Let's get you to safety." When he reached out, she recoiled. Luke paused, changing tactics. From his pack, he produced an emergency thermal blanket, the silver material crinkling as he unfolded it. "Magic blanket," he said, summoning the gentle voice he'd once used with his daughter. "Keeps all the warmth in, all the cold out." Curiosity briefly overcame her fear. Luke wrapped it around her, then noticed something clutched in her hand. A small Polaroid photograph, edges worn and water-damaged. He glimpsed 2 adults and the girl between them, their faces partially obscured by a tear across the image. "Is that your family?" he asked. She tucked it away quickly but nodded once. "What's your name, sweetheart?" He tried again. "Lila." The word escaped as barely a whisper. "Nice to meet you, Lila. I'm Ranger Luke." He gestured to the dog. "That's Scout." A distant rumble of thunder made her flinch. The storm was advancing faster than forecast. "I need to carry you back to my cabin," Luke explained. "It's not far. You'll be safe there." Something in his tone must have reached her. Lila nodded, still wary but recognizing her limited options. Luke lifted her carefully. She weighed almost nothing in his arms, a concerning sign of how long she might have been exposed to the elements. Scout led the way, following their earlier trail markers back toward the cabin. As they walked, Luke noticed 3 parallel scratches carved into a nearby oak. Fresh marks, too uniform to be animal claws. He'd seen something similar once before, years ago, before the disappearance of 2 hikers. The memory sent a chill through him, sharper than the dropping temperature. "Lila," he ventured carefully, "how long have you been in the woods?" "2 sleeps," she murmured against his shoulder. "And who were you with? Your parents?" Her body tensed. "Camping," she said. "Then he came. The man in the red hat?" Luke prompted gently. Lila buried her face against his coat, refusing to say more. The snow was falling steadily now, accumulating on the ground. Luke quickened his pace, mindful of the precious burden in his arms and the dangers a whiteout would bring. The forest darkened as daylight faded prematurely under heavy storm clouds. Scout suddenly stopped, growling low in his throat, eyes fixed on the dense underbrush to their right. Luke froze, straining to see through the gathering gloom. Nothing moved. After a long moment, Scout reluctantly continued, but remained alert, hackles raised. "It's okay," Luke assured Lila, though uncertainty edged his voice. "Probably just a deer." The ranger station appeared through the trees, a solitary light burning in the window. Luke had never been so relieved to see the weathered cabin. Inside, he set Lila on the worn sofa near the fireplace, quickly stoking the banked embers into flames. Scout positioned himself by the window, watchful. "Let's get you warmed up," Luke said, retrieving the first aid kit. He gently examined her bare foot. No serious damage, but she'd need warm water and antiseptic for the scratches. "I need to radio this in," he explained. Moving to the communications desk, the radio produced only static across all frequencies. Luke frowned, switching to the emergency satellite phone. Dead, despite having charged it that morning. Outside, the wind howled as the storm announced its arrival. The cabin's lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. "Looks like we're on our own until this passes," Luke said, keeping his tone conversational to avoid frightening her further. "But we're safe here." Lila's eyes fixed on the window. "No," she whispered. "He knows where I am now." Luke followed her gaze. For a brief moment, between gusts of wind-driven snow, he thought he saw a figure standing at the forest's edge, watching the cabin. Then it was gone, like a trick of light and shadow, but on the window pane, visible as the glass fogged with interior warmth, appeared a perfect handprint, much too large to be a child's. It hadn't been there moments before. The handprint on the window slowly faded as condensation spread across the glass. Luke drew the curtains closed, more to shield Lila from the sight than to block any watching eyes. "Let's get you something warm to drink," he said, moving to the small kitchenette. The familiar routine of heating water and preparing cocoa steadied his nerves. Lila remained perched on the edge of the sofa, the thermal blanket clutched tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes never left the cabin door. "No one's coming in here?" Luke assured her, though he found himself checking that his rifle was within easy reach. Scout had taken position between the door and Lila, ears alert to every sound beyond the howling wind. The cocoa seemed to help. Some color returned to Lila's cheeks as she sipped cautiously from the mug. Luke pulled out his emergency medical kit and gently tended to her scratched foot. She winced but didn't pull away. "Been a ranger here for 30 years, Luke said conversationally as he worked. "Know these woods better than my own face in the mirror. If someone's out there who shouldn't be, we'll handle it." Lila's eyes met his briefly. "He's not someone," she whispered. Before Luke could question her meaning, 3 precise knocks sounded at the door. Scout erupted into frenzied barking. Lila's mug crashed to the floor as she scrambled backward, pressing herself against the far wall. "Don't open it," she pleaded. "Please don't open it," Luke motioned for her to stay back as he took his rifle in hand. Through the window beside the door, he could see nothing but swirling snow in the security light's glow. "Forest Service," he called firmly. "Identify yourself." No answer came. "Just the moaning wind. Probably a branch hitting the door," Luke suggested, though he didn't believe it. The knocks had been too deliberate, too evenly spaced. Scout disagreed, his growl rumbling deep in his chest, eyes fixed on the door. When the knocks came again, 3 slow, measured taps, Luke raised his rifle and approached. Years of training kept his hands steady as he peered through the peephole. Nothing. No one stood on the porch. "Stay here," he instructed Lila. "Don't go out there," she begged. Luke hesitated, then grabbed a heavy flashlight. He cracked the door open against the howling wind, scanning the porch with both rifle and light. Empty, save for a wooden box sitting precisely centered before the door. Luke's instincts screamed caution. He surveyed the tree line, sweeping his flashlight beam across the darkness. The storm had intensified, visibility reduced to mere yards. Anyone, or anything, could be watching from just beyond that veil of white. He quickly retrieved the box and secured the door, throwing the deadbolt for good measure. "What is it?" Lila asked, still pressed against the wall. The box was roughly the size of a cigar box, made of dark wood that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Intricate carvings covered its surface, symbols Luke didn't recognize. except for one that matched the scratches he'd seen on the trees. "Did he leave things for you before?" Luke asked carefully. Lila nodded, approaching slowly. "Gifts," she said, the word carrying no joy. "Before he takes you." Luke placed the box on the table, examining it without touching the lid. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the wood itself unlike any native species he recognized. "He's inviting you," Lila whispered. The lights flickered as a particularly strong gust battered the cabin. The radio crackled to life momentarily, emitting a burst of static before falling silent again. Luke's satellite phone suddenly chimed from his pack, one bar of service appearing briefly. He lunged for it, quickly dialing the emergency park service line. It connected, the ranger dispatcher's voice breaking through in fragments. "Repeat." Unable to reach. "Roads closed. Stay sheltered." Multiple reports of the connection died. Luke cursed under his breath, trying redial, but the signal was gone. A loud thump from the roof made them both jump. Scout barked once, then fell into a low, continuous growl. "Probably just snow falling from the trees," Luke said, though the sound had been too heavy, too localized. Another thump, then another, moving across the roof like footsteps. The power failed suddenly, plunging the cabin into darkness. Emergency lights kicked on automatically, casting everything in a dim, bluish glow. In that half-light, Luke saw the lid of the wooden box slowly open on its own. Inside lay a red knit hat, identical to the type worn by forest rangers in winter, along with 3 items: a child's tooth, a small lock of blonde hair, and a folded piece of paper with Lila's name written in an unnaturally precise hand. Luke slammed the lid shut just as something heavy landed on the porch outside. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, deliberately testing the lock. Luke moved with practiced efficiency, pulling Lila behind the heavy oak table as he overturned it for cover. The doorknob rattled more insistently now, metal scraping against metal. "Back room," Luke whispered, guiding her toward the hallway. "Lock yourself in the bathroom. Use the window if you need to escape." Lila clutched his sleeve. "Don't let him take me," she pleaded. "Not going to happen," Luke promised, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of keeping this forest safe. "Go." As Lila disappeared down the hall, Scout positioned himself beside Luke, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The rattling stopped abruptly. Silence. Luke raised his rifle, aiming at the door. In the dim emergency lighting, his shadow stretched across the cabin floor, like a sentinel. A sudden crash of breaking glass came from the kitchen window. Scout pivoted, barking furiously. Luke glimpsed a pale hand reaching through shattered glass, fumbling for the latch. He fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The hand withdrew. Then came a sound that made Luke's blood run cold. Lila screaming from the back of the cabin. "Scout, stay!" Luke commanded, rushing down the hallway. The bathroom door stood open, the small window above the shower shattered inward. Cold air and snow swirled inside the empty room. "Lila!" Luke shouted, lunging toward the window. Movement caught his eye, a dark figure carrying a small, struggling form across the snow-covered clearing behind the cabin. Luke didn't hesitate. He dove through the window, ignoring the glass that tore at his clothing. The storm had intensified to near whiteout conditions, but Luke could still make out footprints rapidly filling with fresh snow. He followed, rifle ready, straining to see through the swirling white veil. A flash of red, the hat from the box, appeared briefly before vanishing into the tree line. Luke pushed forward, the bitter cold biting at his exposed skin. "Forest Service!" he shouted. "Stop right there." His only answer was the howling wind. The tracks led deeper into the forest, away from established trails. Luke recognized this direction, toward the old indigenous ceremonial grounds, a place locals avoided after dark. A child's cry pierced the storm's roar. Luke sprinted forward, branches whipping his face. He burst into a small clearing, just in time to see the figure, tall, unnaturally thin, disappearing into a narrow ravine. No sign of Lila. Luke slid down the embankment, landing hard on frozen ground. A narrow cave opening yawned before him, darkness more absolute than the night itself. From inside came Lila's voice. "Luke, help me. Without hesitation, he entered, using his flashlight to illuminate the narrow passage. The beam caught strange markings carved into the stone walls, symbols matching those on the wooden box. The passage widened suddenly into a small chamber. Lila stood in its center, alone, her back to him. "Lila," Luke called softly. "It's okay. I'm here now." She turned slowly. In the flashlight's beam, her face appeared strange, too still, eyes too wide. She smiled, but something was wrong about the expression. "You came," she said, but the voice wasn't hers. It was deeper, older, layered like many voices speaking at once. Luke raised his rifle. "Where is she?" Not Lila tilted her head at an impossible angle. "She was lost. We found her, just as we've found you, Protector." A rustling sound came from all around, as the chamber suddenly filled with movement. Luke swung his flashlight wildly, catching glimpses of pale figures emerging from crevices in the walls. Some child-sized, others adult, all wearing various styles of red hats. Their eyes reflected the light like animals. "Guardians of the forest require payment," not Lila said. "One child each decade. The balance must be maintained." Luke fired a shot into the ceiling, the report deafeningly loud in the confined space. "The real Lila, now!" The figures paused. Not Lila's face contorted, then relaxed into a more natural expression. Fear replaced the unnatural calm in her eyes. "Luke?" Her voice was her own again, confused and terrified. "Run to me," Luke commanded. As she moved forward, the other figures lunged. Luke grabbed Lila, tucking her against his side, as he fired another shot, this time at the nearest attacker. The bullet struck something solid, but no blood appeared. Instead, the figure fractured like dry wood, collapsing into a pile of twigs and leaves roughly shaped like a human. Luke didn't wait to see more. With Lila in his arms, he fled back through the passage, emerging into the storm. Behind them, inhuman shrieks echoed from the cave. They raced through the forest, Luke's knowledge of the terrain their only advantage. When they finally reached the cabin, Scout greeted them with frantic barking. Luke slammed the door shut, throwing the deadbolt. Something struck the door with tremendous force, once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. Embedded in the wooden door was an ancient stone arrowhead, its design matching nothing Luke had seen in any museum collection. What were those things? Luke asked, still catching his breath. Lila's eyes were wide with remembered terror. "The lost ones," she whispered. "They become part of him after he takes them." Dawn broke reluctantly through the storm clouds. Luke had been awake all night, keeping watch from a chair positioned between the barricaded front door and the hallway where Lila finally slept. Scout lay at his feet, ears twitching at every gust of wind. The cabin had remained undisturbed since their return. But Luke took no chances. He'd reinforced every window with shelving boards and positioned furniture against the doors. His rifle rested across his lap, loaded and ready. He studied the stone arrowhead extracted from the door. Its craftsmanship was exquisite. Not machine-made, but shaped by hands that understood stone intimately. The material wasn't local either. Black obsidian, volcanic glass that had no natural origin in these mountains. Luke reached into his pack for his field guide to archaeological finds. As a ranger, he'd been trained to recognize and protect historical artifacts. But before he could open the book, his hand brushed against something else. An old brass compass, a gift from his grandfather when Luke was 12. The needle spun wildly, unable to find north. Luke tapped the glass, frowning. The compass had been reliable for decades. A soft shuffling announced Lila's arrival. She stood in the hallway doorway, Scout's emergency blanket draped around her shoulders. "The lost ones are coming back," she said matter-of-factly. "They always do." Luke set the compass on the table, where it continued its erratic spinning. "Who are they, Lila? Who is the man in the red hat?" She approached cautiously, eyes fixed on the spinning compass. "He has many names. The old people called him the Collector. Mom and Dad didn't believe me when I told them I saw him watching our campsite." Her voice caught. "Then Dad went to gather more firewood. When he came back, he was wearing a red hat." Luke's blood ran cold. "Your father was wearing one of those hats?" Lila nodded, tears welling. It wasn't Dad anymore. His eyes were different. He tried to take me into the woods, but Mom fought him. I ran. I heard her screaming for a long time. Luke thought of the figure that had taken Lila, how it had spoken through her afterward. Possession of some kind, or something worse? The compass needle suddenly stopped, pointing steadily toward the cabin wall, directly aligned with the ancient stone arrowhead. Luke picked it up, moving it around the room. No matter where he stood, the needle pointed toward the arrowhead. He placed the compass beside it, and the needle began spinning again, faster than before. It doesn't like the marks, Lila observed. What marks? The protection marks. The ones on the arrow. Luke examined the arrowhead more carefully. Nearly invisible lines were etched into the obsidian, similar to the symbols on the wooden box, but subtly different. How do you know about these marks, Lila? The old lady showed me. In my dreams last night. She looked up at him. She said you'd know her. The one who guards the fire tower. Luke's skin prickled. Margaret Blackfeather had been the fire lookout when he first joined the Forest Service. A Blackfoot elder who told stories of forest spirits and left dream catchers hanging in every station. She disappeared during a blizzard 20 years ago. Her body was never found. Margaret's been gone a long time, Lila. She said the markings keep him away. We need more of them. Outside, the storm had temporarily abated. Luke cautiously approached the window, peering through a gap in the barricade. What he saw made his breath catch. Dozens of trees surrounding the cabin now bore the triple-slash mark, carved fresh into the bark overnight. And at the forest's edge stood 7 stone cairns, arranged in a perfect semicircle, facing the cabin. They're containing us, Luke murmured. No, Lila corrected. They're containing him. The cabin has protection. Luke remembered something, an old storage trunk in the basement where he'd kept Margaret's effects after her disappearance. Rangers took care of their own. Wait here, he told Lila. I need to check something. The basement was cold and damp. Luke found the trunk pushed against the far wall, its brass latches green with verdigris. Inside, beneath a layer of dust and forgotten paperwork, lay a leather-bound book with the title, handwritten in fading ink, The Guardians of Blackwood. The first page bore a detailed drawing of the same triple-slash symbol they'd seen. Beneath it, Margaret's neat handwriting. When the forest takes a child, the collector walks again. When chosen every decade, when the longest night approaches, only those marked as protectors can break the cycle. Beside this passage was a drawing of a forest. Service badge overlaid with the same symbols etched on the ancient arrowhead. Luke closed the book as realization dawned. The winter solstice, the longest night, was just 3 days away. Luke emerged from the basement with Margaret's journal tucked securely under his arm. The old floorboards creaked beneath his weight, a familiar sound that now seemed ominous in the quiet cabin. Lila sat cross-legged on the floor, Scout's head resting in her lap. She'd found paper and crayons, standard equipment for rangers who often encountered children on wilderness educational programs. The image taking shape beneath her small hands made Luke pause, a perfect rendering of the triple-slash mark, surrounded by other symbols matching those in Margaret's journal. How do you know these? Luke asked, kneeling beside her. Lila didn't look up from her drawing. I told you. The old lady showed me. Luke opened the journal, comparing the symbols. The correlation was unmistakable. She said you have the marks, too, Lila continued. Hidden, but there. Luke's gaze drifted to the shadow box, mounted beside his service certificates. 5 Ranger Service medals, each earned through decades of dedicated protection of Blackwood Forest. He'd never noticed before, but the pattern formed by the medal's arrangement mirrored one of the protective symbols in Margaret's journal. Did Margaret tell you anything else? Luke asked carefully. Lila nodded, adding intricate details to her drawing. The collector can only be stopped by someone who loves the forest as much as he does. She looked up finally. She said that's you. Luke examined the journal more closely. Detailed accounts of disappearances dating back to the 1870s, when Blackwood was first designated as protected land. Always children, always near the winter solstice, always in 10-year cycles. One passage caught his attention, The collector was once a guardian, twisted by time and isolation. His protection became possession. What guards the forest must sometimes be guarded against. A notation in the margin, written in a different hand. Ranger Joseph Hayes confronted the entity in 1963, missing, presumed dead. The cycle continued. Luke had known old Joe Hayes, a legend among rangers whose disappearance was attributed to a blizzard. There was a photograph somewhere. He searched the cabin's small library until he found the historical record of Blackwood Rangers. In a faded photograph from 1962, Hayes stood proudly before this very cabin. Luke had seen the photo many times before, but now noticed what Hayes wore on his head, a Red Ranger's winter hat, identical to the one left in the wooden box. "The red hat," Luke murmured. "It's a ranger hat. It's how he marks his helpers," Lila said. "The old lady said a ranger let him in long ago. Now he pretends to be one." The storm outside had momentarily calmed. Luke approached the window cautiously, studying the tree line. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting. He returned to Margaret's journal, flipping through the pages until he found a hand-drawn map of Blackwood. Certain locations were marked with the protective symbols: the ranger station, the fire watchtower, and a third location deep in the forest labeled only as the first cabin. "We need to reach the fire tower," Luke said, forming a plan. "There are supplies there and it's marked as a safe location." "We can't leave," Lila said with certainty. "Not until the sun is highest. He's strongest in shadows." As if confirming her words, Scout growled low, staring at the dark corner of the cabin where the morning light hadn't reached. The shadow there seemed deeper than natural, almost fluid. Luke moved swiftly, throwing open the curtains to let more light flood the room. The shadow retreated, but not before Luke glimpsed a vaguely human shape within its depths. "He's watching," Lila whispered. "Always watching." The radio suddenly crackled to life, startling them both. Through bursts of static came a voice. "Blackwood East, respond." Search teams deployed. "Roads still blocked." Luke lunged for the radio. "This is Ranger Harrison at Blackwood East. I have a missing child, Lila Carter. We need immediate evacuation." Static answered him, then, "Cannot reach. 2 days minimum. Shelter in place." "Reports of unusual activity. Emergency situation," Luke insisted. "Hostile presence in the area." The radio picked up only fragments. Other reports. "Missing ranger at North Station." Wearing red, Luke's blood ran cold. The ranger at North Station was Jim Harlan, his friend for 20 years. "Repeat information about North Station," Luke demanded. The response came through clearly, as if something wanted him to hear it. "Ranger Harlan found wandering in storm, disoriented, keeps asking for the child. Said you would know which one." The transmission ended with a burst of static that formed words no technology could produce. "Brother Ranger." "Bring her to me." Scout barked sharply at the radio as it went dead in Luke's hand. "He's coming," Lila whispered, eyes wide with terror. "And he's bringing the others." Midday brought a deceptive brightness as sunlight filtered through thinning clouds. Luke methodically packed essential supplies: Margaret's journal, first aid kit, emergency rations, ammunition, the satellite phone despite its unreliability, and the ancient arrowhead now wrapped carefully in cloth. "We move in 30 minutes, he told Lila, who was completing a circle of symbols around the cabin's interior, using chalk from Luke's emergency kit. "The fire tower has better visibility, stronger radio equipment, and, according to Margaret, protective symbols built into its foundation." Lila nodded solemnly. "The old lady says we should bring Scout to watch our backs. Animals see the lost ones better than people do." Luke crouched before her. "Lila, I need you to be absolutely honest with me. Is she dead?" The girl met his gaze unflinchingly. "Her body is, but she's still here. She never left the forest." A chill ran through Luke that had nothing to do with the winter air. He'd spent decades in these woods, rational, methodical, scientific in his approach to forest management. But he'd also witnessed phenomena he couldn't explain. Lights where no human traveled. Voices carried on wind when no one was present. The inexplicable behavior of wildlife before natural disasters. The old lady says, "Hurry," Lila added, returning to her chalk symbols. "They're gathering." Luke checked the perimeter through various windows, noting that the storm was lessening, both a blessing and curse. Better visibility for them meant the same for whatever hunted them. "I need to check something outside before we leave," he decided. "Stay with Scout." Rifle ready, Luke slipped through the front door, closing it firmly behind him. The cold hit like a physical blow after the cabin's warmth. He moved cautiously around the building's exterior, checking for signs of intrusion or surveillance. What he found instead stopped him cold. Surrounding the entire cabin, just beyond the porch steps, lay a perfect circle of small animal bones, hundreds of them, arranged with deliberate precision. Some appeared freshly cleaned, others aged and weathered. None had been there yesterday. Luke knelt to examine them, without crossing the boundary they created. The pattern formed symbols similar to those in Margaret's journal, but with subtle, disturbing differences. This was no protection circle. It was a containment barrier. Movement at the forest's edge caught his attention. A figure stepped partially from behind a massive pine. Jim Harlan, dressed in his ranger uniform with a red winter hat pulled low over his brow. His posture was wrong somehow. Too still, shoulders at an unnatural angle. "Luke!" he called, his voice carrying unnaturally across the distance. "Brother Ranger, the child doesn't belong to you." Luke raised his rifle. "Stay back, Jim." "Not Jim anymore," came the reply, the voice fluctuating between his friend's familiar tenor and something ancient, layered. "Jim serves the forest now. As you should. As all guardians should. What do you want with the girl?" Luke demanded. The thing wearing Jim's body tilted its head at an impossible angle. "The forest must be fed. One child freely given each decade. The old agreement. What agreement? With whom?" "The first rangers." "Before your government claimed these woods, they understood balance." Behind Jim, more figures emerged from the tree line, all wearing variations of ranger uniforms from different eras, all with red hats, all moving with the same unnatural stillness. Luke counted 7 before forcing himself to return to the cabin. Inside, Lila had finished her chalk symbols. "Did you see them?" she asked. "Yes," Luke confirmed grimly. "And they've trapped us with some kind of boundary." Lila nodded. "Bone circle. But the old lady showed me how to break it." She held up her drawing, a complex pattern with one symbol highlighted. "We need to mark the 4 directions, then destroy the north point." Luke studied the diagram, recognizing elements from his wilderness training. The directional guidance system used by indigenous peoples of the region relied on similar concepts. "The tower is northeast," Luke said, orienting himself. "If we break the circle at the north point, the old lady says we'll have 7 minutes, Lila explained. "That's how long it takes them to remake the circle." Luke checked his watch, then the sun's position. Nearly noon, maximum daylight, just as Lila had suggested earlier. "We'll need a distraction," he decided. From the kitchen cabinet, he retrieved emergency flares. From his ranger experience, he knew their chemical composition made them burn hot enough to consume bone. "When I signal, you run with Scout straight for those 3 pines," he instructed Lila, pointing through the window. "Don't stop, don't look back. I'll be right behind you." Luke prepared the cabin for their departure, setting up a delayed distraction. A pot of water on the stove would eventually boil over, triggering the smoke alarm. Not sophisticated, but it might buy precious seconds. "Ready?" he asked, hand on the doorknob, flares in his pocket. Lila squared her small shoulders, her expression suddenly older than her years. "The collector took my parents. I'm ready." Outside, 7 figures in red hats now stood in perfect formation at the forest's edge, waiting. Luke's distraction worked better than anticipated. The flare ignited the bone circle's northern section, creating a spectacular burst of blue-green flames that momentarily blinded the watchers at the forest's edge. In that instant of confusion, Luke, Lila, and Scout slipped through the gap and into the dense underbrush. They ran without speaking, Luke setting a pace Lila could maintain, while Scout ranged ahead, alert for danger. Behind them, inhuman shrieks echoed through the trees. The possessed rangers, discovering their quarry had escaped. The forest in winter was both ally and enemy. Their footprints showed clearly in the snow, but the barren branches allowed them to spot pursuers from a distance. Luke led them through the densest sections of pine, where snow hadn't penetrated, minimizing their trail. 7 minutes, Luke reminded, checking his watch. We need higher ground. They scrambled up a steep rocky incline, difficult terrain that would slow their pursuers. At the top, Luke paused to get his bearings. The fire tower stood on the highest ridge, still 3 miles distant. Too far to reach before the possessed rangers reorganized. This way, he decided, guiding them toward a natural stone outcropping that offered defensive position and limited access. Once there, Luke unslung his pack and removed his ranger radio, the more powerful unit he'd been unable to use in the cabin due to interference. It crackled with static when he attempted to transmit. Still being blocked, he muttered. He doesn't like machines, Lila observed, catching her breath. The old lady says they're too new. Luke examined the radio more closely. The interference pattern wasn't random static. It pulsed with an almost organic rhythm. On impulse, he used his knife to etch one of the protection symbols from Margaret's journal into the radio's metal casing. The static immediately cleared. Repeat. All units, we have multiple ranger stations not responding. Emergency protocols in effect. Storm breaking. Air support within 3 hours. All personnel shelter in place and await. Luke keyed the transmitter. This is Ranger Harrison at Blackwood East. Code Black Emergency. I have a civilian child. Hostile entities in pursuit. We are en route to Blackwood Fire Tower. Require immediate extraction. The response came instantly. Copy Blackwood East. Hostiles? Please clarify. How to explain the impossible? Luke opted for practical truth. Multiple individuals displaying extreme aggression. Possible environmental contamination affecting behavior. Suspect connection to missing persons cases. Copy that. Hazmat protocols initiated. Nearest air support diverted to your location. ETA 90 minutes. Can you confirm your GPS coordinates? Luke provided their position, then added, Be advised, approach with extreme caution. Hostiles are wearing ranger uniforms with red winter hats. Consider all such individuals dangerous regardless of identification. Understood. Blackwood East. Signal your location when air support approaches. Luke signed off, disturbed by how easily the emergency response team accepted his warning. Had there been other incidents? Lila tugged his sleeve, pointing to the carved symbol on the radio. More, she urged. All around. Understanding, Luke used his knife to carve the protection symbols on nearby trees, creating a temporary safe zone. As he worked on the third tree, Scout growled, hackles raised. From their elevated position, they could see movement in the forest below. The 7 possessed rangers now moved differently, not as a group, but spreading out in a systematic search pattern. At their center walked Jim Harlan, his red hat visible even at this distance. They're tracking us, Luke whispered, pulling Lila deeper into the outcropping's shadow. Jim suddenly stopped, head tilting as if listening. Then with unnerving precision, he turned and looked directly at their hiding place. I smell your fear, Brother Ranger. Jim's voice carried unnaturally over the distance. Cool. The child belongs to the forest. Luke's modified radio crackled. Ranger Harrison? Jim's voice emerged from the speaker, impossibly present on a secure channel. You cannot keep what was promised. The balance must be maintained. Luke switched frequencies, but Jim's voice followed. Every decade. One child. Freely given. The agreement stands. What happens if the agreement breaks? Luke called out, keeping Lila behind him. Jim's face split into an unnatural smile. Then the forest takes what it needs. Starting with all who wear the badge. The other possessed rangers had frozen in place, awaiting direction. Jim raised his hand, pointing directly at them. Last chance, Brother Ranger. Bring the girl to the first cabin by sundown. Honor the old ways. And if I refuse, then I take every child in the valley when the longest night falls. Starting with those in the village below, the threat hung in the air, terrible in its simplicity. Luke's mind raced. The nearest town was Miller's Creek, population 300, with an elementary school of at least 60 children. "He's lying," Lila whispered. "The old lady says he can only take one. That's the rule." The radio in Luke's hand suddenly shattered, the protective symbol glowing white-hot before fading. The possessed rangers below began moving again, converging on the stone outcropping. "Time to move," Luke said, gathering their supplies. "Stay low and follow me." The fire tower waited, their only hope of sanctuary before air support arrived, if it arrived at all. The climb toward the fire tower grew steeper, the air thinner and sharper with cold. Luke set a sustainable pace, aware that Lila's strength had limits. The sun hung low in the afternoon sky, shadows lengthening ominously across the snow. Scout ranged ahead, then back, a silent sentinel, alerting them to adjust their course twice. When the dog sensed something wrong in the forest ahead, Luke trusted the animal's instincts implicitly. "Need a rest?" Luke asked when Lila's breathing became labored. She shook her head stubbornly, but accepted the canteen he offered. "The old lady says we need to hurry. They're not following our trail anymore. They're going around to get ahead of us." Luke surveyed the terrain with experienced eyes. "The tower's just beyond that ridge. One more push, and we'll be there." The fire tower stood like a sentinel against the darkening sky, its metal framework gleaming dully in the fading light. Built in the 1940s and renovated periodically, it had weathered countless storms and witnessed generations of rangers come and go. Luke approached cautiously, rifle ready. "Stay behind me," he instructed Lila. The tower's ground floor was a small cabin-like structure supporting the observation deck above. The door stood partially open, swinging gently in the mountain breeze. Scout growled low in his throat. "Someone's been here," Luke whispered, noting fresh tracks in the snow. Not human footprints, but strange markings like those outside his cabin. The interior was cold and undisturbed at first glance. But Luke's experienced eye noted subtle signs of intrusion. A drawer not fully closed, a chair slightly out of position. He secured the door behind them, then methodically checked every corner, closet and shadow. "Clear," he announced finally. "Let's see what supplies we have." The tower was well stocked with emergency rations, water, first aid equipment, and a powerful radio set connected to a backup generator. Luke activated the radio immediately, but received only the same static that had plagued his handheld unit. Lila wandered to the bookshelf, while Luke attempted different frequencies. She pulled out a tattered green volume, the standard Ranger handbook issued to all Forest Service employees. "This one decades old, judging by its worn cover. Look," she said, bringing it to Luke. "The old lady's writing." Luke examined the book. Handwritten notes filled the margins in a script he recognized as Margaret Blackfeather's precise penmanship. Where the official text described standard wilderness protocols, Margaret had added her own observations. Full moon affects collector's range, stays near water, and protection symbols must form complete circuits. Any break allows entry. One section on wildlife management contained an inserted page entirely in Margaret's hand, 1986. Collector took Jimmy Waters. Rangers blamed animal attack. I witnessed the taking. Red Hat Ranger led the boy away. Symbols protected me from detection. She was documenting everything, Luke realized. Right alongside official records, he flipped through more pages. Finding entries dating back to the 1960s, Margaret's entire career spent tracking and documenting the entity they now faced. A folded map fell from between the pages, newer than the book itself, with Margaret's final notes dated just weeks before her disappearance. Cycle accelerating, no longer every decade, entity growing stronger. First cabin is the source, must be cleansed with fire and faith. The map showed the location of this first cabin, not far from where Lila had been found. Luke spread the map on the table, correlating it with his ranger's knowledge of the terrain. This structure doesn't appear on any official Forest Service maps. It's older than your Forest Service, Lila said matter-of-factly, studying the map. The old lady says it was the first white man's building here. Built wrong on sacred ground. A notation at the map's edge caught Luke's eye. Collector must return to source at solstice. Manifestation limited to possessing rangers and creating forest avatars until ritual complete. That's why he needs me, Lila said quietly. But the ritual... The radio suddenly crackled to life. Blackwood Fire Tower, this is Rescue Chopper Sierra 9. Responding to emergency call from Ranger Harrison. ETA your position 20 minutes. Do you copy? Luke grabbed the transmitter. Sierra 9, this is Ranger Harrison. We copy. 2 survivors at the tower requiring immediate evacuation. Understood. Approaching from southwest. Weather conditions marginal but acceptable. Prepare for extraction on the tower's roof platform. Hope surge through Luke. 20 minutes. They just needed to hold out 20 minutes. A sound from outside froze the blood in his veins, the rhythmic thump of footsteps on the metal stairs leading to the tower. Not approaching from the southwest. From directly below, Scout growled, positioning himself between Lila and the door. Through the window, Luke saw them, all 7 possessed rangers climbing steadily upward. Jim Harlan in the lead, red hats vivid against the twilight sky. Sierra 9. Luke transmitted urgently, "Be advised, hostiles at the tower. Approach with extreme caution." The radio responded with static, then Jim's voice emerged. "No one is coming, Brother Ranger. Just us. Just the forest." The metal tower groaned as something massive began to climb its framework, something far heavier than any human. "Barricade the door," Luke commanded, shoving a heavy filing cabinet against the entrance. "We need to buy time." Lila worked quickly alongside him, her small hands surprisingly strong as they pushed furniture to block windows and reinforce the door. Scout stood guard, hackles raised, a continuous low growl emanating from deep in his chest. Outside, the possessed rangers had stopped their ascent, forming a perimeter around the tower's base. Jim Harlan's voice floated up, unnaturally clear despite the distance and growing wind. "You delay the inevitable, Brother Ranger. The forest claims its due." The tower shuddered again as something massive continued climbing the metal framework. Through the window, Luke caught glimpses of a dark shape moving with disturbing fluidity. Not human, not animal, but something between. Branches and twigs formed limbs too numerous and too long, moving like insect appendages against the metal. "The Collector," Lila whispered, eyes wide. "Not wearing someone this time?" Luke checked his watch. 15 minutes until the rescue chopper arrived, if it wasn't intercepted. "We need more protection," he said, recalling Margaret's notes about symbols forming complete circuits. Lila was already drawing on the floor with a piece of chalk, recreating the patterns from Margaret's handbook. Luke joined her, using his knife to carve symbols into the wooden floor and around door frames. As he worked near an old storage locker, something caught his eye, a loose floorboard, slightly raised. Luke pried it up to reveal a small, hidden compartment containing a carved wooden ranger badge. Old style from before the modern metal versions were issued. The badge was intricately carved, and as Luke examined it more closely, he realized that the standard Forest Service emblem had been subtly modified to incorporate protection symbols within its design, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for them. "The old lady wore that," Lila said, looking over his shoulder. "She says it's for you now." Luke turned the badge over. Carved into its back was a name and date, M. Blackfeather, 1962, and beneath it, a list of names and dates going back to 1886, the founding of what would become the Forest Service. "A succession," Luke murmured. "Each ranger protecting these woods, passing knowledge to the next." He pinned the badge to his jacket, feeling its weight, the responsibility of generations. The tower groaned as the entity's weight shifted. Metal screeched against metal. A window shattered inward as a branch-like appendage probed for entry. Luke severed it with his knife. The limb writhed on the floor, dissolving into dead leaves and twigs. "Sierra 9 to Blackwood Tower," the radio crackled suddenly. "We are 5 minutes from your position. Prepare for extraction." Luke grabbed the transmitter. "Sierra 9, be advised. Extreme danger at the tower. Do not land. Repeat, do not attempt landing. Copy that." We see unusual activity below. Switching to hover extraction protocol. Can you access the roof observation platform? Luke glanced at the ceiling hatch leading to the observation deck and roof beyond. Affirmative. Stand by. We'll hover above and drop rescue lines. ETA 4 minutes. Hope flared, then immediately dimmed as the entire tower shuddered violently. Metal groaned as something massive wrapped around the structure's base. It's trying to bring down the tower, Luke realized. We need to move now. He boosted Lila toward the ceiling hatch. She scrambled through with Scout following, surprisingly agile despite his size. Luke grabbed Margaret's handbook, the ancient arrowhead, and his rifle before following. The observation deck offered a panoramic view of the nightmare unfolding below. The entity had partially revealed its true form, a massive, writhing collection of forest matter shaped vaguely like a human, but with too many limbs, all centered around a pulsing core of darkness. The possessed rangers circled it like worshippers, red hats vivid in the fading light. In the distance, a pinpoint of light approached, the rescue helicopter. We're going to make it, Luke told Lila, securing her in his emergency rappelling harness so they couldn't be separated. The wooden badge at his chest suddenly grew warm. Looking down, Luke saw the carved symbols glowing faintly blue, the same color as the protective markings Lila had. Drawn, from below came a sound like tearing fabric as the entity ripped away part of the tower's support structure. The entire framework lurched sideways, tilting precariously. "Hold on!" Luke shouted, grabbing a support beam with one hand and Lila with the other. The helicopter appeared through the clouds, spotlight cutting through the gathering darkness to illuminate the damaged tower. The pilot's voice came through Luke's handheld radio. "We see you, but the tower's compromised. We can't approach directly." The entity below released a shriek of rage, sending the possessed rangers scrambling up what remained of the tower's framework. "We need to jump," Luke realized, gauging the distance to the nearest treetops. "Trust me," he told Lila, tightening their harness connection. "I do," she said simply. The tower gave a final groan of protesting metal before its main support failed. As it began to topple, Luke leaped into the void. Lila clutched against him, Scout following in a powerful jump. They plummeted toward the snow-covered forest below. The world spun in a kaleidoscope of white snow and dark pines as Luke, Lila, and Scout plummeted from the collapsing tower. Luke angled their bodies toward a massive snowdrift between pine trees, praying it would be deep enough to break their fall. They hit hard. The snow cushioned the worst of the impact, but pain exploded across Luke's left shoulder as they tumbled down the slope. He curled protectively around Lila, absorbing the brunt of each collision with tree trunks and buried rocks until they finally slid to a stop in a depression beneath a fallen pine. "You okay?" Luke gasped, checking Lila for injuries. She nodded, shaken but intact. Scout emerged from the snow nearby, shaking his coat and immediately moving to guard position. The night had fully descended now, moonlight casting blue shadows across the snow. Above, the rescue helicopter circled in a widening pattern, its spotlight searching the area where the tower had stood. From their position in the depression, they were hidden from both air and ground. "They can't see us," Luke realized. "And they won't risk landing in the dark with hostiles present. The possessed rangers would be searching for them." Luke unclipped the rappelling harness and assessed their situation. His shoulder throbbed, dislocated probably, but his legs were functional. The pack containing their supplies had remained secure. "We need shelter," he whispered. "Can you walk?" Lila nodded again, eyes wide but determined. Luke consulted his mental map of the terrain. They were on the western slope, approximately 2 miles from the first cabin, marked on Margaret's map. In the opposite direction lay a system of caves he'd documented during geological surveys years before. This way, he decided, guiding them deeper into the forest, away from the searching spotlight. Their progress was slow, hampered by darkness and Luke's injury. Every few minutes they paused to listen for pursuers, but the forest remained ominously silent. No normal night creatures stirring, as if everything living held its breath. After an hour of careful movement, They reached the cave entrance, half hidden behind a frozen waterfall. Luke broke through the thinner ice at the edge, creating a narrow passage into darkness beyond. Just a little farther, he encouraged Lila, who was beginning to flag from exhaustion. The cave interior was marginally warmer than the winter night, sheltered from wind and snow. Luke found a small alcove deep enough to hide their presence from the entrance and set about making a minimal camp. A chemical light stick provided soft illumination without the risk of smoke from a fire. As Lila settled against the stone wall, Luke attempted to reset his dislocated shoulder, a skill learned from wilderness first aid training. The pain nearly caused him to black out, but the joint eventually slipped back into place with a sickening pop. "The old lady says you should check the back wall," Lila said suddenly, watching him with concerned eyes. "There's something there you need." Luke gave her a questioning look, but followed her suggestion, moving deeper into the cave system. His light stick revealed ancient pictographs on the stone, similar to the symbols in Margaret's journal, but older, much older. Below the pictographs, half buried in calcified sediment, something reflected the light. Luke carefully extracted it, an ancient flint knife, its handle wrapped in preserved leather binding that incorporated both indigenous decorative elements and European-style craftsmanship. "A trading knife," Luke murmured, recognizing the hybrid design from museum exhibits. Late 1700s, probably. As he turned it over, he noticed symbols etched into the flint blade, matching those in Margaret's journal and on the carved wooden badge. Luke returned to their alcove, showing Lila the knife. "This is hundreds of years old," he explained, "but it has the same protection symbols. The old lady says the knife belongs to the first protector," Lila said, "before your forest service. He was a trapper who learned from her people how to fight the collector." Luke studied the knife more carefully. "Margaret told you this?" Lila shook her head. "Not Margaret. The first old lady. She wears different clothes. Buckskin and beads." A chill ran through Luke that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature. "How many old ladies do you see?" "7, Lila answered simply. "One from each time. They're all protectors who didn't finish their task." Before Luke could process this revelation, Scout's ears perked up. A faint sound echoed through the cave system. Footsteps approaching, unhurried and deliberate. Luke doused the light stick, plunging them into darkness. He positioned himself before Lila, the ancient knife in one hand, his rifle in the other. The footsteps stopped just beyond their alcove. A soft voice called out, not Jim's but a woman's, elderly and serene, "Luke Harrison. I've been waiting a long time to speak with you directly." Into the alcove stepped an elderly Native American woman, wearing a Forest Service uniform from decades past. Her form was solid, but seemed to emit a faint luminescence in the darkness. "Margaret," Luke breathed. "In a manner of speaking," she replied. "We need to talk about what you really face. It's not what you think. It never was." From the cave entrance came the sound of more footsteps, heavy, numerous, approaching fast. "They found us," Margaret said, her form growing more distinct. "And now you must learn the truth." Margaret's luminescent form moved deeper into the cave, gesturing for them to follow. Luke hesitated, hearing the approaching footsteps grow louder. "They cannot enter here," Margaret assured him. "This place is protected by older magic than the collector can overcome. But we have little time." Luke gathered Lila and Scout, following Margaret's spirit through a narrow passage that opened into a larger chamber. Phosphorescent minerals in the walls provided soft blue-green light, revealing ancient pictographs covering every surface. In the chamber's center lay a circle of 7 smooth stones, each bearing carved initials and dates spanning different decades. "The protectors who came before you," Margaret explained, gesturing to the stones. "Each recognized the threat. Each fought. Each failed." Luke knelt to examine the stones. Recognizing Margaret's initials on one, MB 1962-1982, the earliest stone dated to 1886, the most recent to 2002. "What is this place?" Luke asked. "A meeting place. Between worlds." Margaret's form flickered slightly. The indigenous people who first stewarded these forests understood the balance required. Then came those who saw the forest only as resource. The collector, Luke prompted. What is it really? Margaret's expression grew sorrowful. Not what, but who? The first ranger assigned to these woods, Elias Blackwood. The forest was named for him. A human? Luke's disbelief was evident. Once, in 1886, he discovered logging operations disturbing sacred sites. He tried to protect the forest using knowledge he wasn't prepared for, attempting rituals he learned from indigenous traders without understanding their purpose or cost. He became something else, Lila interjected, voice distant, as if repeating words heard elsewhere. Margaret nodded. The ritual was meant to bind a guardian to the forest, a willing protector who would maintain balance between human need and natural preservation. But Elias performed it out of anger, out of possession rather than protection. The forest took him at his word. The first cabin, Luke realized. That was his ranger station. Yes, where the binding occurred. The ritual requires renewal. A child offered to the forest every decade, their innocence and potential feeding the unnatural extension of Blackwood's guardianship. Luke struggled to process this revelation. But you said these protectors fought against him. They were rangers, too. When the Forest Service officially formed, rangers with sensitivity to the forest's true nature recognized what Blackwood had become. Each generation, one ranger would discover the truth and try to break the cycle. Margaret gestured to the stones. Each failed. The knowledge was scattered, incomplete. Until now, she turned to Lila, this child is different. She can see us, all 7 previous protectors. Through her, our knowledge is unified for the first time. Why Lila? Why was she chosen? Luke asked. Not chosen, born with the sight. There are always some who can see between worlds. The collector took her parents because he sensed her power, the threat she represents. When combined with a protector like you, a distant crashing echoed through the cave. System, something large trying to force its way through the protected entrance. He grows desperate, Margaret warned. The solstice approaches, and he has no child for the ritual. Without it, his power wanes. He would take any child, but one with the sight would sustain him for far longer than a decade. How do we stop him? Luke demanded. How do we end this? The binding must be broken at its source, the first cabin, during the solstice window. With these, Margaret indicated a leather pouch beside the stone circle that Luke hadn't noticed before. Inside were 7 small objects, a silver mirror, a bundle of herbs, an iron nail, a vial of water, a piece of charred wood, a small quartz crystal, and a tiny bag of salt. Elements of purification from 7 traditions, Margaret explained. Each protector contributed one. Together, they form the unbinding ritual that none of us could complete alone. And we need to do this at the first cabin? During the solstice? Margaret nodded. Tomorrow night, when the collector is at his weakest, tethered to the binding site, preparing for renewal. But the possessed rangers, Luke began, are fragments of Blackwood's consciousness, not fully him. Vessels he's hollowed out and filled with portions of himself. At the solstice, all fragments must return to the whole for the ritual. That is when you'll face the true collector. The crashing grew louder. Dust and small stones dislodged from the ceiling. He cannot enter, but he can bring down the mountain around us, Margaret warned. There's another way out, a passage that leads toward the first cabin. You must go now. How will we know what to do with these? Luke asked, securing the pouch of ritual objects. Lila knows. We've shown her. Trust her sight. Margaret's form began to fade. Remember, Luke Harrison, you are not just a ranger of this forest. You are its true guardian, what Blackwood was meant to be but failed. The forest chose you long ago. As Margaret disappeared completely, 7 glowing forms briefly appeared around the stone circle, women of different eras, all with the same determined expression. Then they too faded, leaving only a whisper in the air. We will be with you at the end. The hidden passage wound deeper into the mountain before gradually ascending toward the surface. Luke led the way with Scout ranging ahead, the ancient flint knife now secured at his belt alongside the pouch of ritual objects. Lila followed close behind, her exhaustion evident but determination undiminished. "They're arguing," Lila said suddenly, head tilted as if listening to voices only she could hear. "Who?" Luke asked, helping her over a difficult section of the tunnel. "The old ladies. Some think we should wait until morning. Others say we need to go directly to the first cabin now. Before he gets stronger." Luke checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. The winter solstice would arrive at sunset tomorrow, approximately 4:30 p.m. They had less than 14 hours. "What do you think?" he asked Lila, respecting her connection to their spectral guides. She considered this seriously. "I think we need supplies first, and you need to fix your shoulder better. The oldest lady says there's a ranger cache near here." Luke oriented himself mentally. If his calculations were correct, they would emerge from the cave system near the eastern boundary of his patrol sector. There was indeed an emergency supply cache hidden there, one of dozens placed throughout the forest for rangers in distress. The passage eventually opened onto a small ledge overlooking a snow-covered valley. Dawn approached, the sky lightening to deep indigo in the east. Below, the pristine white landscape stretched unbroken, no sign of pursuit. "This way," Luke said, recognizing a distinctive rock formation to the north. "The cache is about a half-mile from here." They made their way down the slope, the fresh snow crunching beneath their boots. Scout moved with heightened alertness, constantly scanning their surroundings. The forest remained unnaturally quiet. No birds, no small animals, as if the entire ecosystem held its breath. The cache was hidden beneath a lightning-struck pine, marked with ranger blazes, visible only to those who knew to look for them. Luke cleared away snow and pine needles to reveal the metal box secured with a combination lock. The standard ranger emergency code opened it, revealing supplies that could sustain them for days. Food, water, medical supplies. Even a satellite emergency beacon. "We shouldn't activate that," Lila said, pointing to the beacon. "The old ladies say electronic signals attract his attention now." Luke nodded, focusing instead on treating his shoulder properly with the medical supplies. As he secured a better sling, Lila explored the contents of the cache, eventually pulling out something that made her gasp. "Look," she said, holding up an antique pocket watch. Its case tarnished silver with the Forest Service emblem engraved on the front. Luke examined it carefully. "This isn't standard cache equipment." "It belonged to him," Lila said solemnly. "The first one." Before he changed, the watch was stopped at 4:27, the hands frozen in time. Luke attempted to wind it, but the mechanism refused to move. When he opened the case to examine the works, he discovered tiny symbols etched into the inner casing, the same protection marks they'd seen throughout their journey. "Margaret must have left this here," Luke reasoned, noting how the position of the hands aligned with sunset on the winter solstice. It marks the exact moment for the ritual. As Luke secured the watch in his pocket, a sound echoed through the trees, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. The search had resumed with daylight. "Could be rescue," Luke said, but doubted his own words. If Blackwood could possess rangers, what would stop him from taking over search and rescue personnel as well? Lila confirmed his fears. "It's him, using their machines to find us. The old ladies say we need to go deeper into the trees, away from open spaces." They repacked essential supplies, Luke marking the cache with a special ranger sign that would alert any real Forest Service personnel to danger. As they prepared to move out, Lila tugged his sleeve. "They're showing me the way," she said. "Not the regular trails, secret paths." Luke studied the terrain ahead. "Lead on, then." They moved through the awakening forest, following Lila's directions as she channeled the guidance of 7 generations of protectors. Twice she warned them to change course moments before search helicopters appeared overhead. By mid-morning, they had covered significant ground, drawing closer to the area marked as First Cabin on Margaret's map. The forest changed subtly around them, the trees growing older, more gnarled. with increased frequency of the triple-slash marks carved into trunks. "We're entering his territory now," Lila whispered, her small hand finding Luke's, the oldest part of the forest, where he first became the collector. Ahead, the tree line thinned around a small clearing. At its center stood a structure that shouldn't have survived the centuries. A cabin built of massive hand-hewn logs, its roof and walls intact despite the decades. No snow accumulated on its roof, and no ice hung from its eaves. The air around it seemed to waver slightly, like heat rising from summer pavement. "The first cabin," Luke said, feeling the wooden ranger badge at his chest grow warm in response. "He's inside," Lila whispered, "waiting for sunset, waiting for us." They retreated to a concealed position downslope from the first cabin, using dense underbrush as cover. Luke studied the structure through his binoculars, noting details that defied conventional explanation. Though appearing to be over a century old, the logs showed no rot, the glass windows no cracks. Around its perimeter, the ground remained bare of snow, in a perfect circle extending 15 feet in every direction. "We have 9 hours until sunset," Luke said, checking the antique pocket watch. "We need to understand what we're facing before we go in." "The old ladies are arguing again," Lila reported, her head tilted in that now familiar listening pose. "Some want to wait until the exact time when he's weakest. Others say we should go now, while he's still gathering his fragments back to himself." Luke considered their options. "What happens when all the fragments return?" "He becomes whole again. Stronger, but also bound to the cabin for the ritual." Lila paused, listening. "The youngest old lady says that's when he's most vulnerable, but also most dangerous." Scout suddenly raised his head, ears alert to a sound Luke couldn't detect. The dog moved cautiously to a fallen log nearby and began pawing at the rotted wood. Luke investigated, discovering a metal case hidden inside the hollow trunk. The ranger markings on its side dated it to the 1950s. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth that had preserved it remarkably well, was a surveyor's transit, the type rangers once used to map forest boundaries and fire lines. Unlike standard equipment, this transit was modified. Protection symbols had been carefully etched into the brass housing, and the lens contained concentric circles of microscopic script in a language Luke didn't recognize. "It's hers," Lila said, pointing to one of the 7 stones Luke now carried in his pack. "RM, 1953-1973, Rebecca Montgomery. The lady with the red hair." As Luke examined the transit, Lila continued. She made it to see the true boundaries, the in-between places. Something in her words triggered Luke's ranger training. Early forestry practices often incorporated indigenous knowledge of boundary areas, places where ecosystems met, where energies changed. Modern rangers called them ecotones. Traditional knowledge recognized them as spiritually significant. Luke set up the transit on its tripod, adjusting it to sight the first cabin. Looking through the modified lens changed everything. The cabin now appeared surrounded by visible energy, layers of light and darkness intertwined in complex patterns. Certain areas glowed brighter, others showed distinct weakness. Most significantly, a pulsing darkness emanated from beneath the structure, connecting to the earth like roots from a malevolent tree. "It's anchored," Luke realized. The binding ritual literally bound him to the physical location. He adjusted the transit, scanning the surrounding forest. Through the enhanced lens, he could see energy lines running throughout the woods, natural ley lines that indigenous peoples had recognized centuries ago, now distorted around the first cabin like water flowing around an obstruction. "The forest is fighting him," Luke murmured. "Has been all along." He focused on the structure again, noting 7 distinct points of vulnerability in the energy field, exactly matching the 7 ritual objects they carried. This couldn't be coincidence. "We need to create a ritual circle," Luke said, sketching a rough diagram in the dirt. "Each object placed at these specific points around the cabin." "At 4:27, Lila added, pointing to the pocket watch. "Not before, not after." Luke continued scanning through the transit, stopping suddenly when he focused on the cabin's single door. There, barely visible, stood a figure watching them. Jim Harlan still wearing the red hat, but now Luke could see the energy connecting him to the cabin. Not just possession. Jim was becoming absorbed, his individual essence feeding the greater entity. Luke quickly collapsed the transit. "He knows we're here." As if in confirmation, the cabin door swung open. Jim emerged, followed by the 6 other possessed rangers, all moving with that unnatural synchronization. They formed a line facing the forest where Luke, Lila, and Scout hid, though they showed no sign of seeing their exact location. "Brother Ranger," Jim's voice carried unnaturally through the trees. "I tire of this game. Bring the child forward, and I will spare the valley below. Deny me, and by sunset every child in Miller's Creek will walk into these woods, called by a voice their parents cannot hear." Luke glanced at Lila, who shook her head firmly. "He's lying. The old ladies say he can't extend his reach that far anymore. He's weakening already." The possessed rangers began a systematic search of the forest edge, moving with mechanical precision. "We need to relocate," Luke whispered. "Find all 7 points and prepare the ritual." As they retreated deeper into the underbrush, Luke glimpsed something through a break in the trees. Rescue helicopters circling Miller's Creek in the distance, and a convoy of vehicles moving up the forest access road. Help was coming, but would it arrive in time? And would they bring more potential vessels for the collector to possess? The race against sunset had begun. The forest darkened prematurely as heavy clouds rolled in from the west, obscuring the winter sun. Luke checked the pocket watch, 2:46 p.m., less than 2 hours until the solstice moment. Using the surveyor's transit, they had identified all 7 vulnerable points around the first cabin, now marked with small stones Lila had collected. "We'll need to place all 7 ritual objects simultaneously," Luke explained, laying out their plan on a patch of cleared earth. "That means approaching from different directions." Scout suddenly raised his head, growling low. Through the trees, they spotted 2 possessed rangers patrolling the perimeter, moving with that distinctive mechanical precision. "They're weakening," Lila whispered. "The old ladies say the fragments are being called back to the whole. These are just shells now." Luke nodded, noticing how the possessed rangers moved with less coordination than before, occasionally stumbling like puppets with tangled strings. The entity was indeed consolidating itself for the ritual. "We need a way to immobilize them without getting too close," Luke said, inventorying their limited supplies. Scout's renewed growl alerted them to something approaching from behind, but the dog's tail wagged in recognition. A Forest Service helicopter passed overhead, circling once before moving toward the valley. The search party was getting closer. Time to move, Luke decided. "We'll circle around to approach from the north side, where the energy field is weakest, according to the transit." As they navigated carefully through the underbrush, Lila suddenly froze, her eyes fixed on something Luke couldn't see. "The second old lady," she whispered. "She's showing me something." Lila moved deliberately to a massive oak tree and began digging at its base. Her small hands soon uncovered something metallic. Together, they extracted a ranger's ceremonial axe, the type presented at retirement after decades of service. This axe, however, was unlike any standard issue. Its dual blades, one steel, one silver, formed a perfect balance, and protection symbols had been carefully inlaid in copper along the hardwood handle. "Thomas Galloway," Lila said reverently. 1912–1932. He used it to mark the boundaries and cut the collector's connections to possessed animals. Luke tested the axe's weight and balance. Despite decades buried in the earth, it showed no corrosion, the blade still razor-sharp. The handle fit his grip as if made for him. "The old ladies say it can sever the energy cords," Lila explained. "The ones connecting the fragments to the cabin." Armed with this new tool, they proceeded more confidently. When a possessed ranger stumbled too close to their position, Luke struck decisively, not at the ranger himself, but at the space just above his shoulder, where the transit had revealed the energy connection. The silver blade passed through seemingly empty air, but met resistance like cutting through thick rope. The ranger collapsed instantly, the red hat falling from his head. the man beneath returning to consciousness with no memory of his possession. "Who? Where am I?" the disoriented ranger mumbled. "Head downslope," Luke instructed firmly. "Follow the creek south." "Help is coming, go!" The confused man obeyed, stumbling away from the first cabin's influence. "It worked," Luke breathed, examining the axe with new appreciation. They continued their approach, using the same technique to free 2 more rangers from Blackwood's control. Each severed connection visibly weakened the energy field surrounding the cabin when viewed through the transit. By 4 p.m., they had reached their planned position. The storm clouds had darkened to an unnatural purple-black, swirling directly above the first cabin in defiance of wind patterns. The temperature plummeted, their breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. Through the transit, Luke could see energy pouring from the remaining possessed rangers into the cabin itself, Blackwood drawing back all his fragments for the ritual. Inside, a humanoid shape composed entirely of swirling darkness moved behind the windows. "It's time to place the objects," Luke said, removing the ritual pouch. "I'll create a distraction to draw attention while you position them at the marked points." Lila nodded solemnly. "The old ladies say I need to be the one to place them. They've shown me the words to speak at each point." Luke hesitated, reluctant to send her into danger alone. "I'll be right behind you, covering your movement. Scout will guard your back." The ceremonial axe gleamed in the strange stormlight as Luke gripped it firmly. "Once the objects are placed, I'll use the axe to sever the final connections at precisely 4:27. "And then?" Lila asked, her voice small but determined. "Then I enter the cabin and confront what remains of Elias Blackwood," Luke answered grimly. "The final step can only be performed inside, where the binding began." The pocket watch ticked steadily toward the appointed time. 27 minutes remained until the solstice moment. Their one chance to break the century-long cycle. From inside the first cabin came an inhuman howl of rage and anticipation, the collector sensing the approaching ritual that would either complete his transformation or end it forever. "Now," Luke whispered, readying himself for what might be his final act as a Forest Service ranger. "Let's finish this." Luke moved first, wielding the ceremonial axe with purpose. He deliberately made himself visible to the remaining possessed rangers, drawing their attention as Lila circled behind with Scout, clutching the pouch of ritual objects. "Blackwood," Luke called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. "I know who you are. I know what you were before you became this." The first cabin's door swung open. Jim Harlan emerged, but his movements were different now, less mechanical, more fluid, as if the entity controlling him had consolidated its presence. When he spoke, it wasn't Jim's voice at all, but something older, layered with multiple tones. "Brother Ranger," the voice resonated unnaturally. "You think you understand, but you cannot. I am the forest now." Luke advanced steadily, keeping the entity's attention fixed on him. "You were meant to protect, Elias, not possess, not consume." The entity wearing Jim's form laughed, a sound like breaking branches and rushing wind. "Protection requires sacrifice." The old people understood this. One child each cycle to maintain the balance. Through his peripheral vision, Luke saw Lila placing the first ritual object, the small silver mirror, at the marked point. The possessed rangers hadn't noticed her yet. "There is no balance in what you've become," Luke countered, continuing to advance. "You're not preserving the forest. You're feeding on it, just as you feed on the rangers you possess." Jim's face contorted with rage. "I saved this forest. When the loggers came, when the miners came, when your government would have stripped these lands bare, I stopped them." As the entity's anger grew, the unnatural storm above intensified. Lightning crackled within the clouds, though no thunder followed, sound itself seemingly swallowed by the thickening air. Lila had placed 3 objects now: the mirror, the herbs, and the iron nail. Each placement caused a visible ripple in the energy field surrounding the cabin when viewed through Luke's ranger senses. Now heightened by his connection to the ceremonial axe and wooden badge. "You did save it," when Luke acknowledged, his tone shifting to something more understanding. "You were a true ranger then, Elias, before the ritual corrupted your purpose." The entity hesitated, confusion briefly crossing Jim's features. In that moment of distraction, Luke swung the axe, severing another energy connection between the cabin and one of the remaining possessed rangers. The man collapsed, freed from Blackwood's control. Rage returned to Jim's face. "You destroy what you don't understand." The entity raised its arms, and the earth around the cabin began to tremble. Luke needed more time. Lila had placed 5 objects, with 2 remaining. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing something he'd taken from the ranger cache, a weathered parchment containing the original ranger's oath, dated 1905. Margaret's journal had mentioned it as having power, though Luke hadn't understood how until this moment. He unfolded the parchment and began to read, his voice clear and firm. "I, as a ranger of these forests, do solemnly swear to protect these lands from all threats, to preserve their bounty for generations yet unborn, to stand as guardian between wilderness and exploitation." The entity screamed, Jim's body contorting unnaturally. "Stop! Those words are mine!" Luke continued reading, the oath's language shifting subtly as he progressed, not just a professional pledge, but something older, woven through with protection phrases that predated the Forest Service itself. With each word, the entity seemed to weaken, the energy field around the cabin fluctuating visibly. To maintain the sacred balance between mankind and nature, to remember always that I serve both the forest and those who would dwell respectfully within it. Lila placed the 6th object, the small quartz crystal, and darted toward the final position with the bag of salt. Scout ran interference, distracting the last possessed ranger who lunged for her. Luke raised his voice, the final words of the oath ringing with power, "and to pass this stewardship unsullied to those who follow. This is my oath, my bond, my sacred trust." The parchment glowed briefly in his hands, then crumbled to dust as the oath's power was released. The energy field around the cabin shuddered violently. "Now, Lila!" Luke shouted. She placed the final object just as the pocket watch struck 4:27. All 7 items, mirror, herb's nail, water-charred wood, crystal, and salt, glowed with soft blue light, forming a perfect circle of power around the first cabin. The entity howled in rage and pain as the ritual circle activated, severing its external connections to the forest. Jim's body collapsed empty to the ground as Blackwood's essence was forcibly drawn back into the cabin. The door slammed shut, windows blazing with unnatural light from within. The structure itself began to transform, the logs twisting and warping as the boundary between physical and metaphysical thinned. Luke advanced toward the cabin, ceremonial axe in hand. "Stay in the circle," he instructed Lila. "No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, don't cross the line until it's done." "What are you going to do?" she asked, eyes wide with fear and concern. Luke's expression was grim but determined. "What rangers do, protect the forest from its greatest threat." With the wooden badge burning hot against his chest, Luke crossed the threshold into the first cabin to face what remained of Elias Blackwood, the final confrontation a century in the making. Spring came gently to Blackwood National Forest. The first wildflowers pushed through melting snow, and birdsong once again filled the air where months of unnatural silence had reigned. Luke Harrison stood on the ridge overlooking the valley, his ranger uniform freshly pressed for the occasion. Where the first cabin had stood for over a century, only a circle of new growth remained, saplings of 7 different native species forming a perfect ring. At its center, a small stone marker bore no name, only the Forest Service emblem and the words, "In Service and Protection." The official report labeled the winter's events as an environmental anomaly combined with mass hallucination from natural gas pockets. The collapsed fire tower was blamed on structural failure due to age and weather conditions. The ranger station had burned down from an electrical short during the blizzard. All very neat, very logical. Luke touched the badge on his chest, newly designed for Blackwood senior rangers, incorporating a small piece of wood from the first cabin embedded in the metal. Only he knew its true significance. Ready? asked the young woman, approaching from the Forest Service truck. Lila Carter had grown taller in the months since the winter solstice. Now living with her grandmother in Miller's Creek, she volunteered weekends with the Forest Service Youth Conservation Program Luke had established. "Just paying respects," Luke replied, giving Scout an affectionate pat as the aging German shepherd pressed against his leg. They walked together down to the clearing where families and officials gathered for the dedication ceremony. The new ranger station gleamed in the spring sunlight. Built to Luke's specific design, protection symbols subtly incorporated into its architecture, visible only to those who knew to look. Regional Director Hayes approached, hand extended. "Quite a turnout, Harrison. Board's impressed with the community engagement. This promotion to Chief Ranger is well deserved." Luke accepted the handshake. Few would understand what had really happened in that cabin on the solstice night. How he had faced not a monster but a man, a fellow ranger corrupted by good intentions and desperate measures. How Elias Blackwood, in his final moments, had recognized in Luke what he himself had once been. The entity had dissolved not in violence but in restoration. The original binding ritual reversed, releasing both Blackwood and the forest from their corrupted symbiosis. In that moment of release, Luke had glimpsed 7 figures surrounding him, the protectors who had come before. With their task finally complete, "We've got an unexpected guest," Hayes said, nodding toward the parking area where an elderly Native American woman was being helped from a tribal council vehicle. Luke's heart nearly stopped. Though he had never met her in the flesh, he would recognize Margaret Blackfeather anywhere. "Impossible," he whispered. Margaret had disappeared 20 years ago, presumed dead. "Last surviving elder from the original Blackfoot consultation group," Hayes explained. "Insisted on coming when she heard about the dedication. Been in a nursing home on the reservation for years, rarely speaks." Today she was adamant. Luke approached the elderly woman, whose eyes brightened with recognition. "You did well, Protector," she said softly, her voice strong despite her frail appearance. "Margaret?" Luke questioned, uncertain. She smiled enigmatically. "Sometimes the forest gives back what it has taken, when balance is restored." Before Luke could question further, she pressed something into his palm, a small carved figure of a ranger, standing protectively beside a child. "The 7th generation ends the cycle," she said. "The 8th begins anew." The ceremony proceeded, speeches were given, ribbons cut. Throughout, Luke felt the forest around them, not as a presence to be feared, but as a balanced ecosystem where human stewardship and natural processes existed in harmony. Lila joined him as the crowds dispersed. "The old ladies are gone," she said matter-of-factly. "I can't see them anymore." "They've moved on," Luke nodded. "Their task is complete." "But something's still here," Lila continued. "Not like before, just watching, protecting." Luke understood. The forest would always need guardians, not through supernatural bindings or ancient rituals, but through conscious stewardship and respect for the balance between human needs and natural preservation. As sunset painted the western sky in amber and gold, Luke took one final walk to where the first cabin had stood. The saplings had already grown several inches since winter's end, vital and strong in the rich soil. He removed his new badge, studying the small piece of the first cabin visible beneath the polished surface, a reminder of what protection truly meant, and the fine line between guardianship and possession. "Rest easy, Ranger Blackwood," Luke said quietly to the peaceful clearing. "We'll take it from here." A gentle wind rustled through the young trees, not the unnatural silence of winter, but the living breath of a forest in balance. As Luke returned his badge to his chest, he could have sworn he heard a whispered response in the evening breeze. "Protect them well, Brother Ranger. Protect them well."